There's a lot of anticipation for the new Microsoft Flight Simulator, and understandably so. In many regards, from what we have seen at least, it looks as though it will be not just groundbreaking, but also a real game changer for the flight simulator genre. And that really does raise a pretty significant question. Where does that leave the competition? Now, if the internet is anything to go by, and let's face it, it's really a good measure of reality, but let's stick with that for now. There are many on the internet who believe that Flight Simulator 2020 will be the end of the line for the other big hitters in the genre, namely X-Plane 11 and Prepared. Of course, in reality, that is extremely unlikely to be the case, yet it would be stupid to dismiss the claim out of hand. Microsoft and Asobo Studios have released a wealth of videos and information over the past months, and it's looking pretty clear that the new Flight Simulator will be revolutionary. So it's only reasonable to take a look at what that means for the other titles in the genre. Before we go any further though, let's get one thing out of the way. This isn't a straight up and up comparison of the various titles on the market. It's impossible to do that before Flight Simulator releases. But that said, this video is a look at what the mainline features of the new title might mean for the likes of X-Plane 11 and Prepared. Of course, we are going to start with graphics. This is the first thing that hits you when looking at screenshots and videos of Flight Simulator, and oftentimes the comparisons with the real-world locations is eerie. Recently, a Reddit post got picked up by the gaming press doing precisely this, a comparison of real-world locations versus their in-game counterparts, and it often was difficult to tell which one was which. Graphics, of course, go into many different layers with Flight Simulator 2020. It's not just about the visual quality here, but also the extent of the details that are available. For example, there's no reasonable comparison between New York City in Flight Simulator versus the same in X-Plane 11. And the same really does seem to be true for just about any city that Microsoft have so far shown off. The details of all these cities are absolutely phenomenal. By comparison, here is London in X-Plane 11, and anyone who knows London will realise this is very far from reality. Although to be perfectly fair, X-Plane 11 can offer some very nice visuals out of the box, and it does depend on conditions such as weather and environment. This is New York at late evening. More sparse than it perhaps should be, but still pretty nice indeed. One thing I've found with X-Plane 11 is that depending on location, it can be a mixed bag. The same can be said for landscapes. But when it comes to Microsoft Flight Simulator, the level of detail so far shown is pretty much unrivaled, especially for an out-of-the-box product. Microsoft Flight Simulator's graphical capabilities then are on an entirely different level altogether. It's made possible, of course, by the fact that Flight Simulator is using real-world satellite imagery, and that the calculations to convert that imagery into 3D game spaces and environments is being done server-side and streamed to the end user. The level of technology and resources required to do this simply is not available to the vast majority of developers and companies out there. The access to not only full-scale planetary satellite imagery, but also worldwide server and network infrastructure is something only a handful of companies around the world actually possess. Perhaps only Google and Amazon could achieve similar results. However, they don't have gaming or flight simulator experience. Whilst the case is still open on this one, the other tantalizing prospect of the amazing levels of detail in Microsoft Flight Simulator will be the ability to have full visual flight rules for the entire planet. VFR, of course, is the ability to visually fly a plane without any instruments, and this can be done by navigating via line of sight, using landmarks, scenery, rivers, roads, and other such things. Up until now, flight sims just haven't had the technology to allow for full-world visual flight, and this has been primarily due to the fact that the level of detail in the game world is just not high enough. Whilst it's fair to point out that most sims have sold add-ons to enable VFR within select regions at additional expense, and some free mods also exist that enable this, the downside is that the amount of required data storage is significant, even for relatively small areas. So yes, VFR is possible in pretty much all flight sims from the past few years. However, it's extremely limited in scope and capability and comes with additional cost factors. Microsoft Flight Simulator, on the other hand, due to having a fully detailed planet Earth, should, theoretically at least, allow for full VFR around the entire planet. This is a huge deal to anyone who is seriously interested in flight sims. It's also a massive advantage that Flight Simulator will have over the competition, as essentially they basically have no realistic way to even compete with this feature. The extent to which visual flight is actually possible in Flight Simulator, however, will not be known until release, or at very least some form of open beta. Whilst all the locations that have so far been publicly shown are almost one-for-one copies of the real world, we still do not know if that extends to every single square metre of the planet, or indeed every town and city. Technically, based on what we have been told and what we have seen, it should be possible, but we are just going to have to wait and see if that's actually true. The flight model is an area where Microsoft and Asobo Studios really do have their work cut out. Some people have pointed out that the previous iterations of Microsoft Flight Simulator are not exactly world-class when it comes to the flight models. One of the largest complaints in this area is that Flight Simulator has previously felt as though it is on rails, meaning that planes generally do not operate as you would expect them to. The general feel, for example, of feeling more like being on a roller coaster than on a plane. It seems like an odd criticism to hear, but flight dynamics are perhaps one of the most important factors of a good flight sim. To be fair though, it's a debate that has raged on for years. After all, the feel of a flight model can be very subjective. Yet even still, which flight sim has the best flight model is a frequently asked question. Perhaps both X-Plane 11 and Prepared have a good case for claiming this title, but again, it will depend on who you ask. Now of course, all the major flight sims put a massive amount of work into their flight models, and all of them go to exceptional details when it comes to their planes. It seems unlikely then that Microsoft Flight Simulator will be able to offer anything that blows the flight models of the other sims out of the water. However, it's clear that a lot of work is going into both the flight models and the atmospheric models for Flight Simulator, so it's certainly not planning on sitting back in this regards. It's no secret that the weather effects in Flight Simulator look amazing. Whether it's just the light cloud cover or full-on storms, what we have seen so far is pretty much unmatched by anything else out there. Of course, weather in flight sims isn't just about the visual finesse, it's also about how it affects the atmospheric model and in turn the flight model. Both X-Plane 11 and Prepared do a good job of this. It's very easy to make a catastrophic mistake, for example, during a storm in X-Plane 11. Weather then can certainly keep things interesting. It's also worth pointing out that weather is customizable in all the major flight sims, so if you want to fly in clear weather or during a storm, you are certainly free to do so. Out of the box though, Microsoft Flight Simulator appears to have a ton of options. These are very flexible and allow the user to change the weather in real time without the need for reloading of assets or other such frustrations. The weather can also use a real-time option, so that it matches the real-world weather at any one particular moment for the chosen location. Added to this, the sheer graphical quality of the weather in Flight Simulator seems fantastic. In the end, it's genuinely hard not to be impressed by the visuals on offer here when it comes down to the weather. Without a doubt, there's a lot of hype surrounding the new Microsoft Flight Simulator, and the few points here I've listed so far are just very few of the comparisons that we can ultimately make. Ultimately, we're about to compare pretty much the full thing, but that is going to have to wait for release of the final product. But yes, Microsoft Flight Simulator has certainly attracted a lot of attention, not just of the mainline flight simmer crowd, but also the attention of the mainstream gamer. It's pretty common to see comments from people saying that they have never played a flight sim before, but are very interested in Microsoft Flight Simulator. The bottom line then is that the flight sim has a lot to live up to. It's very likely that it will be impossible for it to deliver in all areas and match the sheer level of hype that is growing around it, but that's entirely to be expected at this point. The real question for many will be what effect will Flight Simulator 2020 have on the competition? Well, it seems pretty clear to me that it will have an impact. How large an impact that turns out to be, we will just have to wait and see, but my bet is that it will be fairly large. Microsoft Flight Simulator seems to be aiming to do a lot of things that have never been done before, and added to this, it appears to be offering a huge amount of content and value straight out of the box. It's worth reiterating at this point, of course, that flight sims are very well known for the content additions. This includes first-party and third-party content, and free mods, as well as much more. With additional purchases such as cities, VFR updates, weather enhancements and more, it's certainly possible that the likes of X-Plane 11 and Prepared can be dramatically improved over their vanilla versions. But this comes at a huge cost and time investment. Indeed, some simmers will have spent thousands of dollars to build their chosen sim platforms up. It's something that has become somewhat of a status quo within the flight sim industry. Microsoft Flight Simulator then does represent a very real threat to this. We would have to be absolutely foolish to believe otherwise. It means that the arrival of this new sim will, without a doubt, upset the apple cart and change the marketplace. Just how far this goes, though, remains to be seen. The flight sim genre has shown to be extremely resilient over the past decades and has weathered all manner of hardware and software challenges. It's entirely possible that very little will actually change when all is said and done. But if I were a betting man, I know where I'd be placing my money.